And as part of those tax cuts, I've announced that I will eliminate taxes on tips for restaurant workers, hospitality workers, and anyone else that gets tips. No more taxes on tips. You know how I did that? It wasn't really a lot of study, a lot of work. I've been hearing about it for years, how unfair it is. And Biden just passed a set of regulations that make it impossible for waitresses and people that get any people getting tips. He passed something that makes it impossible. But I've been hearing, and last week I was in Las Vegas at a beautiful building that I built and is great, the Trump Hotel. And I'm having, oh, you like it, I like it too. And I was having dinner with a group of people on the campaign, and the waitress came over. She was very nice, and I said, if you could have any wish, what would it be? She said, that we get rid of the taxes on tips, sir. I'm also doing no tax on tips. No tax on tips. So waiters, waitresses, caddies, people that drive cars, people that get tips who have been harassed by this government, we're going to have no tax on tips. That's a big thing.
No tax on tips. Yeah!
About to 6 weeks later.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
So there you have it. Weeks and weeks, I think it's about 2 months after Trump first announced no tax on tips, Kamala Harris comes out with her very first actual policy announcement, and she copied Trump. No tax on tips. Of course, there's a big difference between the two. We all know that Kamala Harris is just pretending. She's just flat out lying. She's never, if she ever had the chance, she would never initiate no tax on tips. So even the liberals that now have to pretend to support no tax on tips as proposed by Kamala Harris, they know she's lying. They even know it. But here's the best thing, the most wonderful thing about Kamala Harris plagiarizing no tax on tips from Donald Trump. And it's that after Trump announced no tax on tips, and before Kamala Harris also copycatted him, lots and lots of media folks and liberals in general, such as you're going to see in a moment, a Biden-Harris economics advisor and a big official in the Culinary Workers Union, they all came down hard against no tax on tips. They acted like it was the stupidest idea, and Trump's an idiot for proposing it. And guess what? Now that Kamala Harris has come out in favor of no tax for tips, they have to do an embarrassing, humiliating U-turn. I'm really anticipating their very, very painful angst as they try to explain themselves. You know that, oh, I can almost taste their angst. Okay, let's watch as the liberals and the media folks started slamming no tax on tips until Kamala Harris also copied him.
It should come as no surprise that the all-caps tax relief that Donald Trump is promising are actually backdoor ways to give rich people big tax breaks. Here's how Donald Trump claims he came up with the idea for no tax on tips at a restaurant in Las Vegas.
The waitress comes over. How's everything going? A really nice person. How's everything? Oh, sir, it's so tough. The government's after me all the time on tips, tips, tips. I said, well, they give you cash. Would they be able to find them? She said, actually, and I didn't know this, she said, very little cash is given. It's all put right on the check. And they come in and they take so much of our money, it's just ridiculous. And I said to her, let me just ask you a question. Would you be happy if you had no tax on tips? She said, what a great idea. I got my information from a very smart waitress.
That the supposed waitress addressed him as sir is the first tell that this story might not be on the level. But here's the thing. Trump's proposal isn't actually about a few bucks on a diner meal. An analysis from the Center on American Progress finds, quote, the tax cuts it would provide low and moderate wage tipped workers would be small or non-existent, and it contains few, if any, guardrails to prevent high-income professionals, such as hedge fund managers, from shifting their compensation to a tax-free tipping model, end quote. No tax on tips for hedge fund managers. Sir, that is not a great idea. Joining us now is Brendan Duke, Senior Director of Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. He was an advisor to the Biden-Harris National Economic Council. Brendan, there's so much to explore here, but let's just start with the tips, all right? It'll have virtually no income effect on anybody making less than $28,000 a year. That's about $14 an hour if you're talking about an hourly wage, which is what a lot of people who are in the service industry earn. This is not what Donald Trump is suggesting that it is.
No, it is the Trump University of tax plans. That's the best way to put it. Trump wine, Trump steaks, take your pick, right? So Ted Cruz took Donald Trump's idea, ran with it, turned it into legislation. And when you look at it, it just doesn't make any sense. So as you said, the problem is tipped workers just don't make much money. So they don't pay that much in income taxes. So over a third of tipped workers don't pay $1 in income taxes, so don't get $1 of tax cut. Some of them would get their child tax credit cut. So as you were saying, let's take a married couple, makes $28,000, one's a waiter, one's a student, $0 of tax cut from this because they just don't make enough money to get a tax cut. Vice President Harris, on the other hand, does have a plan to cut their taxes. She would cut their taxes by $600 by increasing the earned income tax credit. I think
Nevada's powerful culinary workers union opposes Trump's idea, saying its members are smart enough to know the difference between real solutions and wild campaign promises from a convicted felon. A nonpartisan estimate this week says it would cost the federal government up to $250 billion in the coming decade in lost tax revenue. Trump's ideas require congressional action, and this week, Republicans close to him unveiled plans to make it law.
There's one part of Trump's campaign that's been getting a lot of buzz lately, and that's his pitch to exempt tips from being taxed. So could it be a good way to lure in working-class voters? Well, the plan isn't hitting the mark for everyone. Let's ask Ted Papageorge about that. He's Secretary-Treasurer for Nevada's Culinary Union. Mr. Papageorge, it's great to have you. By the way, have tips ever been exempted from taxes before? I'm just curious, what's the backstory here?
Well, not since any of us have been working. Yeah, I was a tip earner. My parents were tip earners. And the reality is that we've been fighting against unfair tip taxation for over 30 years, but the courts have ruled that tips are income. So the idea that somehow we're going to get out of taxes on tips is just kind of silliness. And, that leads to kind of the problems with Trump's, again, it's a wild campaign promise, really, is that.
I can almost taste it already. It's coming soon. Their liberal angst over having to just humiliate themselves by pretending that, hey, you know what? Tax on tips isn't so bad because Kamala Harris also proposed it. I can almost taste it. I can almost taste that angst. Oh, it's going to be so tasty, so good. Yum, 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 yummy.